I think a good example is the person that says, well, I paid 20 for this horse and I've won XYZ with him. Well, you can insure him for more than 20 if you've won a ton with him, no problem, right? But then the person says to me, but I can't replace him for 20. That might be true, but do you want to pay to insure him for 100, or do you just need to get your money back, right? So I think I'm really cautious of people over-insuring, but I'm cautious of people over-insuring generally, not just in the horse world, right? Insurance isn't a financial windfall. Insurance is to protect what you have up. In the case of a horse, anyway, that's kind of how I see it.
Bring them in on the rail at a jog, please. On the rail at a jog.
Hello, everybody. Back with another On the Rail podcast episode. Today, we have Jana Simons, and I'm super, super excited to get her on. She's somebody I've looked up to for a long time now, both in the horses and professionally, and as a very accomplished career woman herself. So this is going to be exciting today. We're going to hear a little bit about her and her story, and then she is also going to answer some questions for us on the basics of horse insurance, because I know that's kind of something that can be a little bit of an enigma for us common folk and what we need to know about insuring horses. So with that being said, Jana, you want to take just a minute to introduce yourself to people that may not know you? I think a lot of people know you, but in case there isn't somebody out there that isn't familiar with you, if you want to talk about a little bit about what you do in the horses and how you got your start with horses.
Sure. Thanks, Jenna. Really happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to be on, guys. So my parents were horse trainers. Lynn and Andrea Simons primarily paint horses when I was growing up. We've had my parents raised some really nice horses and bought and sold some really nice horses. So my sister and I grew up showing as young people. My father died in 2005. So my sister and I and my mother decided to carry on and stay in the business. And so my involvement now is a little more limited maybe than it used to be. I used to run Simon Show horses with my mom and sister for a number of years. And then I shortly thereafter left and joined the legal profession. So I'm not sure if I got all the high points of your questions there, Jenna, but that's kind of a brief introduction.
Yes, absolutely. Her family is kind of legendary in the paint horse breed for sure, and has now, of course, gone on. Sarah, her sister, is a trainer, judge. Her mom's a judge. And so they have had Zippo Sensation, who's the all-time leading paint horse sire and just completely legendary on all fronts. So very, very well-accomplished family. What are you doing this year or right now currently with your horses, despite being an attorney now? So what exactly are you involved with still?
So yeah, as you said, maybe your introduction was even a little bit better than mine. So my mom and sister both judge a lot and really involved. My sister's got a full training barn. Some paint horses still, mostly quarter horses though now. So I guess to sort of tag along with that, I hang out at the ranch a lot. I'm not going to say every weekend, but most weekends. So my sister and mom and I own a few horses, and I say few in a very loose manner. The few is definitely fluctuates. Right now it's on the high side of a few. Many would say my definition of a few is not actually consistent. So we buy and sell some young ones. I think my goal for the horse thing, for the show horse side anyway, is to have a few all-around horses, 1, 2, 3 all-around horses that we can kind of bring them along, teach them some fun tricks, add some classes, and then sell them. So I had a couple nice ones in the past, and I have a really nice 3-year-old this year that I did just the rail with him this year. Won some hunt seat with him, and he's won a bunch of money in the pleasure side too. So Sarah and I are busy trying to add some classes. He looks like he wants to do some trail and maybe change leads. So all mine have to do showmanship, really big fan of showmanship. So he obviously does the showmanship. So hoping to get some of the classes added for him. And then, like most of ours, they got to go one day. So we'll sell him and then we'll start another one. So from the pleasure horse perspective, that's kind of my angle, is usually to buy a young one, add the classes, and then sell them. I probably show more on the reining side. I ride with Danny and Fred Tremblay, that are French-Canadian guys that moved down to Oklahoma a number of years ago. And so I try to always have a fraternity horse with them. So try to focus on the 3-year-olds if I can, and then sell that 3-year-old and buy another 3-year-old the next year. So the reiners seems to be, from a showing perspective, kind of more of a focus for me, because from the pleasure horse side, as you guys know, sometimes, when you buy young ones, sometimes they're ready, sometimes they're not, there's a little bit more of fluctuation, I guess, there. But from the reining side, I try to always have a 3-year-old show horse that, try to get them ready in August, do some of the futurities, take them to the NRHA futurity, and then same deal, sell them when they turn 4. So I guess short answer, I've got a futurity horse from the reining side, and I've got a couple all-around prospects on the show horse side.
Do you guys do any breeding still, or you pretty much just buy the young ones and then sell them?
My mom still raises a few. So she probably, I'm going to guess and say she raises somewhere between 3 and 6 every year, which is a significant downshift from where we were, in the days when we had Zippo Sensation and raised 20 to 40 or, some nonsense like that. So still raise a few. I don't own any broodmares. I used to raise a few reiners too. I try to stay away from the broodmare thing now. You're so far from, from my perspective anyway, you're just so far from the show pen, where it works really well for my mom. That's, she's got a facility there to feed the recipient mare if that's what it is, or, whatever kind of comes up. But for me, I'd probably rather go buy what I want and stay focused on, this is kind of the plan, show them when they're 3 and sell them. So I'm trying to think if Sarah's involved in raising any. I think both she and I kind of stay away from, the breeding and raising if we can. And my mom raises a few, but certainly not to the level that we used to be, Jenna. Definitely not to that level.
You guys definitely paid your dues back in the old, I don't want to say the old days, but in the previous years doing that. So I definitely can't fault
for sure.
For just wanting to go a little quicker route with the buying and selling the prospects. So yeah. What do you enjoy more between the reining or showing the all around? Or do you like different things about both of them?
Yeah, they're very, very different. I really enjoy being a part of the process. And from the all around side, I'm a little bit more a part of the process, right? I get to be involved in their development, maybe a little bit more firsthand from the pleasure horse side, because I've done that a little bit longer. I guess I would frame it as I bring a little bit more to the table in terms of their development from an all around perspective. And so that's a lot of fun for me. It is a ton of fun to watch. Sarah and I had a really nice all around horse a couple years ago, and then to watch the gal that bought it go on and win with it. That is so much fun for us. So I think I enjoy very different things about them. It's always nice to do some of your own work. And from the all around side, I try to contribute as much as I can. I'm obviously not there like I used to be all the time anymore, but I try to contribute as much as I can from the all around perspective. As far as the reiners are concerned, it's just a ton of fun, guys. If you've never rode a reiner, they're just so fun. Danny and his team there do a great job of having my horses ready, and showing a broke reiner that's ready to go compete is just, there's a ton of adrenaline there. And I'm not really an adrenaline junkie, I guess, but they're just so much fun. So it's hard to describe exactly what riding one of those that has that level of difficulty, right? So those horses that can run that fast and then go that slow, and those are really, really neat horses, a ton of fun to ride.
What got you started in the reining?
So at the time, I think I started showing reiners in like 2007-ish, maybe. And at the time, very candidly, I was an amateur from the all-around perspective, and I wanted to show, but we had a lot of clients showing all the time, and there wasn't really a conflict necessarily, but I tried to do something a little bit different, I think. I was a non-pro myself, but because I was doing the breeding and kind of managing the ranch and I was there every day, I just felt like maybe that wasn't the best thing for the industry or my family's business specifically. And so I just kind of wanted to do something else, where I guess you guys you've been there, where you kind of want to just show, you just want to focus on yourself, and you just want to go have a good time in the show pen. And so I sort of needed to find a little bit of a different outlet, I think. And for me, that was the reiners. I started showing reining with a gal named Shelly Reese, and she did a really, really great job of kind of teaching me from the foundation. And one thing I thought, that I was a pretty productive rider on the all-around side, but it is so different to go ride a different discipline, right? And Shelly really worked with me a lot to kind of help me figure out the different elements and how to kind of put all that together. And so I had a lot of success with her. She had a couple of really nice young horses and a really nice older mare that kind of showed me the ropes, I guess. And I was just kind of hooked, to be honest. So it gave me a different outlet where I wasn't always, going to the horse shows on top of all of our clients and that kind of thing. So I learned at that point to, maybe have a nice prospect that you can bring along. And when it's ready to sell, go ahead and take the opportunity to sell it. And to the extent you want to show, maybe go focus on a little bit of a different discipline. And so it's worked out really well for me, guys. I've had really, really great help, from Shelly. And then really I rode with Shelly for 12 or 13 years. And then she kind of decided to slow down. And I don't know if you're not I'm not sure which page you can follow of Shelly's, but she still sells a lot of reiners, but she now vacations a lot and goes on sort of like extreme adventure vacations. And so kind of watching her on social media is always interesting because there's things when you know her, she's a really reserved and quiet person. And then she's jumping out of airplanes and, nothing ever basic. Like Shelly doesn't want to go to Paris, right? She wants to go do in the, up outer Mongolia or whatever. And so she has a great time. Anyway, when she decided to kind of back off of training horses, I went and started a new relationship with Danny and Fred, and they've been great to me. So.
Gotcha. I think reining is on all of our bucket lists at some point. I don't know when that day will come, but I can't wait to ride like a really good broke reiner. I think it looks amazing.
They are definitely a ton of fun. 10 out of 10 recommend, gals. I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, will do. So I know you have won a gazillion titles, in your time as a youth and an amateur and probably even in some open levels and whatnot too. But is there any one of those or times or horses that stands out to you over the course of your show career?
There have definitely been some special ones. There have been some that my parents instilled in us early on that, if you're going to kind of be in the horse business to the level we were, that there's an opportunity to sell those horses and you need to kind of be ready. So I'm not going to tell you that there weren't a ton of those horses that I shed a tear for when they left. So there were some really, really special ones. I had a really nice youth horse when I was younger, and I actually got to keep her because she turned out to be an outstanding producer. Her name was Morning Whispers. So Whispers was my kind of, I'm going to say, longest teammate there, but got to raise some really nice ones. Interesting little side note, she raised Zippo Sensation's first world champion. So she was the dam of Brightly Zippo and then raised a bunch of really nice foals for us. She was a great cross on Zippo. So I actually got to keep that one. But of recent years, I've had some really nice ones. I would say from the reining perspective, Shelly and I had a mare named Miss Dreamy who was out of A Gal with a Gun. And so I got to show both of those two. Miss Dreamy's the one that's bridle fell off at the World Show with Dan Huss. So Shelly and I raised her and I showed her as a 3-year-old. So she was a ton of fun. And her mother was probably one of the nicest horses I've ever sat on. So those two from the reining side were really, really special. From the all-around side, guys, I've been blessed beyond what I deserve, right? I do not deserve the number of nice horses that I've had. I mean, but they're all kind of, they are all special in their own right. The one that Sarah's boyfriend let me borrow a horse this year that I leased from him. Its name was Only in a Bentley. And they each have their own little special thing about them. So there's just been a ton, right? I mean, the Bachelor was really a nice horse for us. He was really special. But I mean, I guess if I kind of have to pick one, Morning Whispers taught me more than I could ever ask. I was a young person at that time and she taught me a lot. So I really, really appreciate her for that. Yeah, definitely been pretty fortunate. I do not deserve all the success that I've had, but I've been pretty fortunate. I don't know, maybe my favorite all-around horse would have been Maximum Zippo, probably. He was a bay and white paint by Zippo Sensation. Gal in California raced him named Libby Floors. He was probably my favorite if I had to pick one. Aaron Bradshaw bought him from us and went on and had a lot of success with him too. So such a neat horse. The only time I've ever had one that won both rails, the pleasure and the hunt seat, won the showmanship and the horsemanship with him all in the same year. So really, really a neat horse.
I was actually going to bring that up. I was like, if I remember correctly, he did win the Hunter Under Saddle and the Western Pleasure for You in the same year. And that was kind of at the point where it was really getting difficult to do that because horses were getting so specialized. So I remember that happening and that being really neat to see.
Yeah, that's a really, really neat horse. So I guess it's a little bit easier if I sort of look at my wall and see which ones after all the years make the walls, because that one, Max, I feel like Max would have been 2003, 5-ish, somewhere in there. My dad was still around for Max. So that had to have been, my father passed away in 2005. So that had to be pre-2005. So after all these years, that one is still very, very special.
Yeah. And he went on to have good success with Aaron too. So cool. Very cool horse. So Liz, did you have any questions for Jana before we kind of dive into the horse insurance
No,
stuff?
I think most of my questions are going to be in this insurance portion just because I am very not with it on the insurance side. So I think we're okay to move on.
Alrighty, perfect. Well, we will get into that now. I know Jana actually wears very many hats when it comes to her professional life, but one of the things she does is she dabbles in the horse insurance. So can you tell us just a little bit about generally what you do with the insurance and who you work for?
Sure. So I have done this for, I will date myself, I don't know, sometime longer than a decade. So I've been a equine producer, an insurance producer for a little over a decade, I would say. Presently, and have been with EMO for a number of years. So EMO is a division of Marshall Sterling. So for me, I focus exclusively on performance and show horses, right? So it doesn't matter if that's a hunter jumper, an all-around horse, right? The point there is they're doing something competitively, right? As opposed to a pet, right? It's fairly difficult to insure, a pasture animal. So I'm with EMO. I have been with them for a number of years now. Solid company. Adjusters are amazing, at helping our clients. EMO does a ton of other offerings, so I can help you with other things as well. Personally, I try to stay with the horses. And then if I have somebody, I do lots of trainer type insurance, right? Where they need liability coverage for their facility or horse show stuff or farms and ranches. I can do all that as well. I'm just probably going to refer you to somebody that specializes in it within EMO a little bit more than I do, to kind of help us out a little bit. So my focus tends to be the horses because it's what I have the most experience in, right? So again, to the extent there's other horse-related activities that somebody needs to cover, EMO is awesome for all of that as well. But for me personally, I think especially for purposes of this podcast, I think we're going to focus just on the horse thing. So ensuring mostly just performance horses, but like I said, farms and ranches, liabilities, horse shows, whatever that is, we've probably got coverage for it as well.
Cool. Yeah, we're going to stick just with the horse insurance for this podcast because insurance is, a rabbit hole we could go down for days and days and days. I think it's kind of not that exciting, so we'll keep it pretty basic here. So when should somebody consider insuring their horse?
I think most people do that from an investment perspective, right? Even for me, I've bought and sold some that are a little bit more than I'm willing to risk. And that might be a $15,000 yearling that you bought, or it might be a $150,000 show horse, right? It kind of varies, but what I tell people is it has to be something you're comfortable with, right? So if you're comfortable with that $15,000 yearling, and if he dies tomorrow, you're okay with that, there's no sense in spending the money to insure him, right? This is all a level of personal comfort. So what makes sense for you? I've got people that spend $350,000 on a horse for the kid, and they're not sure if the kid's going to want to dance tomorrow or show the horse. They want to be sure they get a little something back for him. So they may not insure him for $350. Maybe they're only going to insure him for $150, right? Because when you get to that type of value, of course, insurance gets costly. So I have people that say, well, I think a good example is the person that says, well, I paid $20 for this horse and I've won XYZ with him. Well, you can insure him for more than $20 if you've won a ton with him, no problem, right? But then the person says to me, but I can't replace him for $20. That might be true, but do you want to pay to insure him for $100, or do you just need to get your money back, right? So I think I'm really cautious of people over-insuring, but I'm cautious of people over-insuring generally, not just in the horse world, right? Insurance isn't a financial windfall. Insurance is to protect what you have up. In the case of a horse, anyway, that's kind of how I see it. Because in our industry, I think you guys would all agree, if I bought him for $20, I won the world with him, I now think he's maybe worth $150. If I get $150 for him when he dies, if he dies, am I going to go spend $150 for another one, or am I going to go try to spend $20 for another one? And that question's important because if I'm probably not going to go give $150 for the next one, why did I spend all that money to insure that horse for that dollar? And some people disagree and they say, but he was worth $150 and that's a huge loss to me. Maybe, but that's also very expensive to insure that horse for $150,000. I don't want to take your money unless you recognize exactly what that means for you. If you're going to, go and try to spend 20 to 30 to 40 for another one, perhaps that's where we should keep the insurance just to keep it more affordable.
Right, definitely. What is the average kind of rate cost on, let's go with a normal all-around horse, because I know it varies depending on the discipline the horse can be involved in from time to time. But what for you guys is kind of your average rate on a $20,000 horse?
You're right, Jana, in that it varies based on discipline, but it also varies based on age. So age is what we see in the all-around to be the biggest kicker, right? Some of these horses, we have such great veterinarians and such great farriers and such great trainers that those horses are still, packing the kid around at age 22. And so the age is probably the biggest driver. When that horse hits 15 to 16 to 17, that insurance starts to really escalate fast. So I think the first thing we have to think about is age, is how old is he? But to your point, discipline. So for a quarter horse, all around horse, those are somewhere in the range of about 3.4% of his value, right? So if we're going to insure a $10,000 horse, $340 is his mortality coverage, roughly, right? You're going to find some that are, 3.2, 3.3, some that are even probably 3.6, right? So you're somewhere in that range. Call it 3.4. So in your example, your $20,000 horse is $680 annually for his mortality only. We'll talk about that, what that comes with, and that comes with complimentary coverage up to $5,000. In the case of EMO anyway, some I think are $2,500 of complimentary colic. EMO's $5,000. So if he colics, I have people that come to me and say, well, what kind of coverage do I need? If all you're concerned with is him dying or him colicking, that's probably enough. We probably don't need to add more coverage, right? So his mortality with that complimentary colic is probably going to get you where you want to be. But again, you sort of, for dollars and cents purposes, let's take our $10,000 horse that was $340. Our $100,000 horse is $3,400, right? So, this escalates really fast. So where I was going, in my kind of talking to my clients and counseling them that, are you sure you want to insure the horse you gave $20,000 for? Are you sure you want to insure him for $150,000? He may be worth $150,000, but again, what are you going to buy the next one for? Are you going to find what you want, or are you just probably going to go buy another prospect? So the dollars and cents of it are definitely a big driver. And I try to make sure people kind of have a good concept of that, because year after year, that does kind of add up.
Mm-hmm. It comes down to an individual conversation.
Absolutely.
So if, say, people buy an already broke, has a great record on it already, and they insure it, what about the other end when we get a prospect? How would you talk to a client about insuring a prospect they just bought?
Really, really good question. And I get this a lot. In fact, I had somebody the other day that wanted to insure one, and I think they gave 25 for him in my recollection. And they said, but he's worth 75. The problem with that is the insurance company does not understand what that means. That is not a colorable argument for an insurance company. So to your question, Liz, when we buy a horse on today's October 16th, we bought the horse on October 16th and we gave $25,000 for him. $25,000 is what we can insure him for. You can insure him for less. You don't want to insure him for $25,000, but you can't call me and say, I bought him on October 16th. I gave $25,000. I want to insure him for $45,000. The insurance company doesn't understand that, so that doesn't work. Now, you buy him for $25,000 and you want to take him to the horse show. You take him to the horse show and you're circuit champion your first time out. You call me and you say, I want to raise his coverage. We can probably do that. So there's no problem, but you needed to have proved to the company that you added to his value in some way, right? So baseline is going to be what we paid. As soon as we are somewhat removed from what we paid, couple months, went to some more shows, next policy period, whatever, you want to go up, no problem. To your question of prospects, we bought a prospect. So if I bought a baby, this one's also really challenging for a lot of people to understand. We bought a baby, we're going to start with 3 times his stud fee. So that's sort of your baseline. If you're going to escalate from 3 times his stud fee, so we paid $1,000 for a stud fee. If you want to insure him for more than $3,000, we've got to explain to the insurance company why he's worth more than $3,000. He very well might be, right? But we have to have some facts. His mother's a world champion producer, his full sibling won the Congress, or, whatever, however we can justify his value to the company, we've got to start with stud fee, and then we've got to go up from there. So those are kind of your 2 baselines, or purchase price or 3 times stud fee if we're talking about a little guy. Again, the issue that I get most often is, well, but he's worth so much more than that. Okay. We have to explain that to the company. I'm going to help you do that, but we have to explain that to the company. The other thing people try to do a lot is they want to call after they've put me a year of horse training in him, and they say, well, I want to insure him for the training value. That's a really hard ask, right? You've had him in training, and yes, we all know that the horse industry can really, really be costly, but that's a hard ask, right? To insure for what you've got in him, as far as training is concerned. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just curious because I was at the super sale yesterday at Congress, and I was like, I'm curious how, because they do a deal with Markle at the Congress sale. So I was like, I'm curious how they're insuring those yearlings that they just bought and what their amount would be for. So it just had me thinking today for our podcast. So yeah, that answered my question perfectly.
So Markel, I may offer buyer coverage for a number of days, even a week. So when you buy that horse, they may extend some level of coverage to that animal, but it's usually very, very temporary. It's complimentary oftentimes for the sponsor of the sale, and it's usually a day or a week or something like that. And then you obviously need to pay to insure the animal. But that would be based 100% on what the horse brought at the sale.
Okay. Interesting.
Real quickly, before we kind of dive into too much more of this, why don't we touch on the difference between the mortality insurance that the base level insurance we get on horses versus the medical insurance, and just so everybody's clear what mortality insurance is actually covering.
This is a funny one. I have friends that are in property and casualty insurance. And of course, when you're talking to somebody that's in property and casualty insurance, that's probably somebody that does houses or cars or boats or, these sorts of things. And so when I have friends that are in P&C insurance, and I'm like, oh yeah, I do, I do horse insurance. They always kind of look at me like I have 17 heads. And so it's sort of funny, but the questions that you get even from people too, that don't really understand insurance, they think, well, I have life insurance as a person and I have health insurance. So isn't it the same? Sort of, but not really. So you might have life insurance on your life, which is separate and apart from your health insurance. Generally not the same carrier, generally not the same policy, right? Nothing really, the two don't converge at all in the context of a person. And if they do, it's pretty minimally. In the context of a horse, it's all the same policy. So we're not going to have a mortality policy on a horse, and then you're going to go get a separate policy from somebody else for his medical coverage. It's all going to be the same policy. So we're going to start with mortality coverage because mortality coverage is standard. So the other thing I sometimes get asked, and I hadn't really thought about it too much until somebody said, but from the context of a person, Jana, you can have health insurance without having life insurance. In the context of a horse, it's rare, almost not possible to have medical coverage for a horse and not have mortality coverage. So it's sort of funny when you think of it from the perspective of a person, because of course that's totally possible to just have health insurance and not have life insurance. So the horse insurance policy is going to start with the mortality. So in our hypothetical of our $20,000 horse, we've got $680 annually for his mortality, and that comes with his $5,000 of complimentary colic. If he has to go in and have hock surgery, not covered, because so far in our hypothetical, we just have a $20,000 horse covered for his mortality and his complimentary colic. Many people are perfectly comfortable with that, and they just want their money back if he dies. So that's $680, you're out the door. If you would like to add major medical coverage, so it's an additional coverage on top, you could think of it as some kind of a rider if you want in the context of, people insurance. So an additional coverage line would be the major medical of that animal. Major medical is, as it sounds, not something like a hock injection, because that's probably not a major issue. I have a client right now that's experiencing some issues where it's an unidentifiable lameness. The vet cannot figure out what the lameness is caused from. So they've done some diagnostic testing, MRI, that kind of thing, a bone scan. So now the client has opened a claim, a medical claim, and that's going to be covered under his medical insurance. So we've got our mortality coverage. Most policies are going to come with some kind of complimentary colic, some $2,500, some $5,000. And now we're going to add on top of that some medical coverage as well. There's a bevy of additional coverages, but I think for our purposes in this hypothetical, instead of getting into some of the other coverages that you can add on, suffice it to say that you're going to start with a mortality policy in all cases. The good example is like a stud. There's lots of different additions to policies for stallions. But for our all-around gelding that we paid $20,000 for, basically your options are going to be mortality with major medical. If we want to talk about it in the end, we can talk about some loss of use, which might also apply to our gelding. But most of the other coverage additions are for specialized things, right? That might be a broodmare, that might be a stallion, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's good for people to understand that the major medical with horses is not the same as medical insurance with people. It seems like the horse's coverage is more of like you said, it's not going to cover maintenance, routine vet work, none of that. It's really something, I don't want to say catastrophic because it doesn't have to be catastrophic, but something more significant above and beyond normal maintenance happens with your horse. But also it differs in a way because humans have ongoing medical insurance coverage regardless of what they kind of come in with, generally speaking. Now with horses, though, can you touch on what happens? It's almost like, in my experience, if you've had to have a big claim, you kind of have like a one swing at that claim, or maybe the next year there might be some coverage, but after that, it's most likely going to be excluded. So how does the human medical insurance differ from horse medical?
First of all, I have to commend you because I think that your sort of synopsis of that was actually really good. So well done, you. But you're right. From a person, and it was probably only a couple of years ago that somebody compared it to people insurance with me, where I was like, I guess that makes a lot of sense. Now I understand why people, struggle with these concepts so much, because it is so different than people insurance. But I guess I should call it health insurance more than people insurance. So from an equine perspective, you're right. It's not always catastrophic, but it is something typically out of the ordinary. One of the things I'm going to kind of promote EMO here for a second. One of the things that we try to be really great at is to stay on top of those exclusions. So we'll use our hock surgery example. So the horse has a chip and a hock. The vet recommends removal. So you go in, you remove that. We're going to pay. So the client pays the veterinarian and then is reimbursed by the insurance company. So the insurance company pays. There may be a deductible. There may be some kind of a copay. For purposes of this conversation, maybe a little bit outside of the scope, but suffice it to say, you'll have some kind of deductible. It might be $500, it might be $1,000, whatever that is. So you're going to pay your portion. You're going to be reimbursed for the hock surgery up to the limit that you have. So you may have a $10,000 major medical limit on your policy. You may have a $15,000 major medical limit on your policy. So the insurance company is going to reimburse you. Now you have a policy that notes the horse had hock surgery on his left hock. Okay, you're going to rehab that horse. You're going to start riding that horse. And in 6 months, we're back in the show pen and we're winning and we're rocking and rolling. The next policy period, you're going to probably have an exclusion for that hock. So we're not going to cover that hock for medical issues any further. Now, in our case, if you can prove to me that that has been resolved, that exclusion can be removed in the future. So it's not a deal breaker. You're not dead in the water. If it's something that the veterinarian process worked just fine, we removed that hock chip, the horse went back to performing, exclusion removed, no problem. Some companies give you a little bit more trouble about it than others. EMO does not. If you have proven to us that issue's been resolved, the horse is back in the show pen, the veterinarian says, course of treatment was successful, no problem. So they're not always a dead in the water, like, I don't want to claim this because I don't want an exclusion. A lot of times that's what we have coverage for, right? That's why we pay the money to add the major medical coverage. So that's why you have the coverage. Claim it, let the insurance company help you pay for it, prove to us that the horse is back, successfully performing at a high level, and then we can remove that exclusion.
It's very important for people to fully understand what their policies do and don't cover, and have a good relationship with an agent to explain this stuff to you, because it can be very, very confusing.
No, I think that's really true. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions, right? I think there's so many terrible stories out there about, the insurance company wouldn't pay for this, and there are some insurance companies that are notoriously, a little bit difficult to get claims paid. And for me, I've had such great success with EMO for my clients. Like I said, the adjusters are all great to deal with and communicate and want to be sure you try to get paid. And so as long as, we stay above board and we communicate, and the client, to your point, Jenna, lets me help them understand what's covered, man, horse insurance can really, really help offset some of unexpected costs.
Definitely. Real quickly, let's just go over the main, words, verbiage that you might see kind of on a general policy, so everybody's clear what they mean. And I know we've used some of these words already in our conversation, so we'll make sure we get it cleared up. So premium, what is that?
So your premium, I think that's one consistency with horses and humans. Your premium is just your out-of-pocket expense, right? So in the example of our $20,000 horse that we just had mortality coverage on and came with this complimentary colic, it was $680. Your premium is $680. So you may pay that once up front. You might pay that on installments. The other thing that people typically don't understand is monthly installments. I'm not sure if I guess it would probably be your health insurance. I suppose you pay your health insurance monthly. It's bad that I don't know that off the top of my head. Horse insurance is typically at a maximum paid quarterly. So for some really big policies, you can sometimes pay it more than on a 4 interval increments, but typically quarterly, and those do come up a little faster than quarterly. So they're usually not every third month, but in 4 installments, let's call it 4 installments. So typically 4 installments is the maximum number of installments to get you, to pay the full premium.
Right. What about deductible?
So your deductible, similarly with humans, is going to be your portion paid, right? So the insured's portion that's paid with whatever that claim is.
And that's probably just going to be on like a major medical type policy. Like there wouldn't be a deductible on most mortality policies. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct.
Okay. And then out getting too confused here, but coinsurance, and that typically would be on a major medical too. But what is that?
Let's just suffice it to say coinsurance isn't applicable to horse insurance. So a copay, of course, is the portion of that claim that is paid. So if my copay is 10% or 20%, you see copays a lot of times with diagnostics. So if the horse needs a bone scan, you might have a 20% copay of that bone scan. So if the bone scan was $3,000, the owner of the animal might pay a 20% copay.
Okay. Thanks for clearing that up for us. And
Sure.
Then limit.
So your limit, I think we're going to call that mostly in the case of a major medical limit. So you have different options. So your annual medical limit will be the most that the company will pay, right? So if you have our $20,000 horse and you want $7,500 of medical, that would be a $7,500 major medical limit in a year. So if you have 2 or 3 claims, once you've hit $7,500 in the aggregate of all of the claims that you've made, then you're over your limit and now you're on your own, right? You've got to pick up all of those costs. So in the case of EMO, our major medical limits go up to $15,000. So you could have a $10,000 major medical limit, $12,500, $15,000. So obviously they get a little bit more expensive, but not dramatically so, right? I mean, there's a difference in a few $100 as you go up the scale of limits, and then $15,000 is typically for most insurance companies, I would say the highest major medical limit.
Okay. And then claim, of course, is just when you have to file something with your insurance to seek reimbursement. So we've kind of talked about claims a bunch. And then you briefly mentioned exclusions earlier, and that is just when something is then not covered for a specific reason. Is that the correct?
Yep, that's exactly right.
All righty. We'll start kind of wrapping things up, but if somebody wants to insure the horse, what does that process look like for them? How would they go about doing that? What do they need to know? Do they have to have a vet, exam scheduled for the horse? What does it involve?
Yeah, you also mentioned something else, which was when you use the terminology submit a claim. Something that I think people don't realize is that typically a claim, in going back to my hawk surgery example, quote unquote, submitting a claim with us anyway is really an easy process. There's a 24-hour claims line, and you call them and you give them the information and you're good to go, right? So this is not tons of paperwork. This is not a terribly arduous process. So most of the time, again, I cannot speak to other companies. I can only speak to our company, but that's a really fairly easy and seamless process. Adjuster typically wants to talk to the horse owner and kind of get the understanding of what's going on. And then from there, they're just going to kind of send you email reminders like, hey, what's going on with this? Send us some information from the vet. They're going to try to work as directly with the vet as they can to kind of make this process pretty easy. But going back to your question, we're going to insure a horse. What do we need to do? So assume we just paid $20,000 for the horse. We've kind of covered the fact that $20,000 is what we're going to be able to insure him for. So that's a single page document. It's a really easy application. It's one page, gets us a little bit of information about him. We submit that single page document and you are good to go. So the horse is, for all intents and purposes, completely covered and set to go when we receive that application, of course, subject to some underwriting, which doesn't hiccup the process all that often. If the horse is over $100,000 in value, we will need a vet certificate. This is not the same as a vet exam. So when you think, oh, I'm going to go do a pre-purchase exam on my horse, you bought the horse. It's a single page document that the veterinarian fills out and says, the horse appears to be sound. It appears, all of these things. So it's not necessarily a quote unquote exam. It's a vet attestation that basically says this animal is insurable. So those are kind of your two basic forms. Both of those are fairly straightforward. In the case of babies, especially little guys that are under the age of 6 months will almost always need a vet exam. Over 100,000, we need a vet exam. So I'm not going to say, and I'm using the term I just told you not to use, a vet certificate, right? So pretty straightforward. We do not need radiographs. We do not need, we don't need all of these things. For things like loss of use, which is not typically we just don't see it in the all around world all that often. You may need those things, right? But for purposes of insuring a horse for his mortality and his medical, we generally don't need extravagant vet reports and all of these things, radiographs and that sort of thing.
One thing I wanted to definitely point out again is that with medical claims with horses, like people need to understand that you do still have to pay for everything up front, like your vet costs. At least this is my experience, and Jenny, you can correct me if I'm off here, but it's like you pay your vet, you have all the expenses, you're responsible for that. And then the insurance company, you would submit the claim to them, they would review it and then reimburse you for what you're eligible for. But it's not like the insurance company ever pays the vet necessarily. Have you ever seen that with horses?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you're responsible for paying your veterinarian. One of the important things, I think, so that people don't get a bad taste in their mouth and they don't have a bad experience is, to your point, either communicate with your agent and let your agent help you know what to expect, or ask the adjuster. So when you make that claim, and, again, going back to my hypothetical hock surgery, those are fairly straightforward, very prevalently covered, not really an issue. But if you have something kind of unique, ask that adjuster, like, hey, what should I expect? What's going to be covered here? What's not going to be covered? A lot of times you see that in the case of diagnostics, where some policies don't cover certain diagnostics, being that a bone scan or an MRI or whatever that is. But I think, to your point, Jen, I think it's a really good point. You are responsible for paying your vet, but I don't like my clients to be surprised. So it's important, I think, to know what to expect there, right? To communicate with the agent or the underwriter and make sure that you know what may or may not be covered, so that you're not disappointed when something isn't covered.
No, it was super insightful for me as somebody that's always looking for a prospect. I've never known how to actually insure a horse. So this was definitely beneficial for me. So I appreciate it.
Good.
Jana, is there anything additional or important you feel people should know about horse insurance?
I think we've probably sufficiently overwhelmed them today. So I think we should probably tap the brakes on more insurance talk. No, but I mean, I've got people that go to a new trainer, and I've got lots of, trainers that sort of recommend me in different situations. And, the client will come and they'll be like, yeah, such and such wants me to move my insurance. And to be honest, the important part here is that you have a good relationship with the agent. You know what to expect. If you're happy with where you're at and they're doing you a good job, I think that's awesome. If you have questions and you want to kind of ask around, then I recommend you do that, right? You need to understand what you're paying for. You need to understand what to expect when you have a claim. So I think trying to kind of really cultivate that relationship, in my opinion, is important. If you're really happy with who you're working with, I think that's the important thing. That agent, if you have confidence that agent's going to try to help you navigate the process to the extent they can, I think that's worth its weight.
Yeah, absolutely. You need somebody knowledgeable in your corner. So hit Jana up if you are trying to get started on this stuff. And with that, Jana, can you tell people where they can find you or how they get a hold of you?
So I'm not a super challenge to get a hold of, but some people have told me I am. So I'm on Facebook. That's always a pretty easy one. I can provide my email address for you gals to put in the show notes if you want. It's just jana.simons@yahoo.com. So email's definitely the best to the extent you're able to do that. Again, I can leave you guys my cell phone number so you can put it in the show notes if you want also. You can go to EMO's website and kind of, Google EMO and you'll be able to find me that way too. But I would say email or Facebook are probably the two easiest ways to find me.
Alrighty. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate the conversation and you giving us a little bit of a deeper dive into how to talk horse insurance, because it's really confusing to most people.
Sure. I'm happy to do it. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely.
All right, that'll be your class. Bring them in and line them up.